Franklin Delano Roosevelt, or FDR, was born January 30th, 1882 in New York. Roosevelt attended an Episcopal boarding school in Massachusetts. There he was influenced by its headmaster, Endicott Peabody. Roosevelt then went to Harvard College. During his time at Harvard, his fifth cousin Theodore became President of the United States. Theodore became Franklin's role model and hero. Roosevelt graduated from Harvard in 1903 with an AB in history. He later received an honorary LL.D. from Harvard in 1929. On March 17, 1905, Roosevelt married Eleanor. They had 6 children: Anna Eleanor, James, Franklin Delano Jr., Elliot, another Franklin Delano Jr., and John Aspinwall.
I now pronounce you husband and wife.
Roosevelt had many affairs outside his marriage, including one with Eleanor's social secretary, Lucy Mercer, which began soon after she was hired in 1914. When his wife found out, FDR promised never to see Lucy again, but broke his promise and began seeing each other again in 1941. In 1910, Roosevelt ran for the New York State Senate, won, and took his seat on January 1, 1911. In 1914, Roosevelt made an ill-conceived decision to run for the U.S. Senate seat for New York. He was soundly defeated by Tammany Hall. In 1920, Democratic National Convention chose Roosevelt as the vice presidential candidate with Governor James M. Cox of Ohio. They were defeated by Warren G. Harding in the presidential election. In 1928, Roosevelt was nominated governor of New York by the Democrats, won the election, and was elected to a second term. Roosevelt had an affection for the Navy and was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy. He worked to expand it and founded the United States Navy Reserve. In 1932, Roosevelt ran for president and won. In the 1936 presidential election, Roosevelt won 60.8% of the vote and carried every state except Maine and Vermont. Roosevelt ran for a third term and won in the 1940 election and ran for a fourth term in the 1944 election and won. He was the only president who served for 12 years and 4 terms. Because of the Depression, many people were out of jobs and a lot of land was destroyed. A quarter of the workforce was unemployed. Industrial production had fallen by more than half since 1929. 2 million were homeless. Because of this, FDR came up with the New Deal, or the First 100 Days, which concentrated on immediate relief. Roosevelt came up with the Civilian Conservation Corps, or the CCC, which hired 250,000 unemployed young men to work on local projects. He expanded Hoover's Reconstruction Finance Corporation, making it a major source of financing for railroads and industries. Roosevelt set up the Agricultural Adjustment Administration, or AAA. The AAA tried to force higher prices for commodities by paying farmers to take land out of crops and to cut herds. Roosevelt also came up with the Tennessee Valley Authority, or TVA, which built dams and power stations, controlled floods, and modernized agriculture and home conditions in the Tennessee Valley. In August 1921, while the Roosevelts were on vacation, Roosevelt contracted polio, which resulted in permanent paralysis from the waist down. Roosevelt refused to accept that he was paralyzed. He was able to convince many people that he was getting better by fitting his hips and legs with iron braces and teaching himself to walk a short distance by swiveling his torso while supporting himself with a... At the age of 62, Roosevelt went to the hospital for tests and found out that he had high blood pressure, coronary artery disease causing angina, and congestive heart failure.
I have a terrific pain in the back of my head.
After Roosevelt fainted, he was taken into a room and his cardiologist, Dr. Howard Bruin, diagnosed a massive cerebral hemorrhage, and at 3:35 p.m., Roosevelt died.
You have a hemorrhage.
After Roosevelt's death, an editorial by the New York Times declared men will thank God on their knees 100 years from now that Franklin D. Roosevelt was in the White House.